Spokesman for the International Olympic Committee, Mark Adams, is refusing to comment on whether the organization believes Peng Shuai has been speaking, quote, under duress during her recent interviews and meetings with IOC representatives. Adams says he does not believe it's the IOC's job to decide if there should be an investigation or not.
I'm not sure we're able as a sports organisation to make that call. I think the President was right in saying it shouldn't be for us to judge whether there should be an investigation or not. You've seen the words which in the interview which he gave to L'Equipe, I think it was an hour and more interview yesterday or the day before, whenever it was, which was published this morning. I think we need also to listen to her, and we need to read what she's saying. As we've also discussed, we've been in contact with her. We remain in contact with her. We've met her in person. We've invited her to come to Europe, and we will meet her again. And I think we can say that we are doing everything we can to make sure that this situation is as it should be.
Tennis star recently appeared at the Olympic Games after being presumed in hiding following sexual assault allegations against a former high-ranking member of China's ruling Communist Party. When asked about the allegations, Shuai responded, quote, nothing to see here, move on. Joining us now is Bethany Allen-Ebrahimian. She's a China reporter for the media outlet Axios. Bethany, good of you to join us tonight. Let's stick with sports for a moment. We're hearing reports out of China, concerns that athletes are not being given adequate meals, that COVID tests may be false positives, also that China can possibly get a leg up in competition. How do you trust the veracity of those reports?
Well, I think what's underlying a lot of this is a pretty strong distrust in Chinese authorities. It's not surprising that there are logistical issues around COVID tests. It's not surprising that the meals aren't always working out. We saw also some pretty, some difficulties in the Tokyo Olympics. I think what's different this time is maybe a couple of things. First, it's the really extreme measures that we are seeing in Beijing that the Chinese authorities are using to keep the Olympic staff and athletes separate from the rest of China's population due to China's zero COVID policy. So that involves a lot of things that really have never been tried before. So, from that perspective, it makes sense that things aren't always going smoothly. On the other hand, what's behind all this distrust? Well, this is a decades-long buildup of, so many incidences in which Chinese authorities from, the top levels down to the bottom, sometimes hide things, lie about things going poorly, either for political reasons or just to improve their own image. So I think that's what's underlying a lot of these, a lot of the incidents that we're seeing.
You mentioned the efforts to improve China's image, and a lot of that has been working with companies, executives here in the United States, to the point that a co-owner of the Golden State Warriors said that, quote, no one cares what happens to the Uyghurs in China. Is that the sentiment that the American business community has because the opportunity is just so big in China?
What we've seen over the past 5 to 10 years is that U.S. companies and really any multinationals with significant business in China have gotten loud and clear the message that if they publicly criticize some of China's policies or these red lines that the Chinese Communist Party has set, that their business in China is going to be affected. And, the Uyghur genocide and what's happening in Xinjiang is top of that list, as is Hong Kong, Tibetan issues, things like that. So what we've seen from Olympic sponsors and from the NBA, from these companies, is that they know they cannot criticize China on these issues, but increasingly, Beijing is in some cases demanding a proactive public statement saying, giving approval. So, for example, last year there was a lot of controversy within China over Western clothing companies, non-Chinese clothing companies, H&M, Uniqlo, Zara, that would say, they would say we're not using Xinjiang cotton, after pressure from the U.S. to not use cotton that may employ Uyghur forced labor. But having said that publicly, the Chinese populace was really unhappy with that. Those companies faced backlash. And so some of the companies, such as Boss, came out and said in Chinese, actually, we're really proud to use Xinjiang cotton. So this is an issue we've seen rising up over and over again. And the overall effect is that it's hard to speak out freely and to speak clearly about the horrendous human rights abuses that China is committing.
You mentioned the NBA, and we also know that an ad by NBA star Enes Kanter and a Florida congressman that was criticizing China for its human rights abuses, NBC refused to air it. The NBA lead commissioner, Adam Silver, has called the relationship complicated, and he hopes he can make it a positive one. Is business pressure possible to change the behavior of China?
It would have to be concerted. I mean, it's interesting that he used the word complicated. That's a nice neutral word that doesn't acknowledge any of the actual issues. If there were a concerted, united effort by companies across the U.S. and in Europe and around the world to hold a line on free speech and on being able to comment on not just what's happening in China, but on the complicity that some of these companies knowingly or unknowingly have. If there were a united effort, then yes, it would have China would have to to change some of its policies because they want that business. They need that business. It's not just the other way around. It's not just that these companies need revenue from the Chinese market. But the problem is it's really hard to get individual companies to take that enormous risk together. It takes a lot of organizing. This is the kind of thing that you see more commonly nonprofit organizations, trying to do. And that's why the role of government and leadership in this area is so important, because there's a profit motive involved.
As you mentioned, there's lots of complicity involved in the Olympics happening in China while there's a genocide going on. And as we often hear, silence is also complicity. Bethany Allen-Ebrahimian, thank you so much for joining us today. She's a reporter for China issues at Axios.